Beep, 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 beep. Got an interesting one today. I'm really coffee warrior teacher. Give me some money. You know the usual, right? How are we all? It's a great, things going on. We love it when things are going on. I love it anyway. Right, okay. So here we go. Right, great article from Christina Buttons. My thank you to Christina Buttons who published this on the 6th of April. So it's a really interesting one because it's about the nonsense people spout at you when they're trying to justify their belief in a cult system, right? So this was a particularly good one for that. So let's begin. Let's hunker down and do some debunking of the transgender brain sex argument. The notion that gender identity is brain-based and innate has captured the political left. This article explains how to debunk transgender brain sex conjecture. So it's a very useful article, particularly, for example, to warrior teachers or those who would like to go, nah, not having any of it. So go subscribe to Christina Buttons and make sure you bookmark, PDF, whatever it is, this article, so you've got it when you need it to throw at people that are stupid. All right, okay? So, why do progressives and gender activists fervently believe that transgender women are literally women? Why do they believe in the existence of transgender children that must be medically transitioned to avoid going through the wrong puberty, right? Why is gender identity taking precedence over biological sex in legislation like Title IX? How can they confidently assert that the science is on their side? It's a good question, isn't it? Eh? How to start an article. The answer to all these questions is due to the belief that being transgender is an innate biological property of human beings. The notion that gender identity is brain-based and innate has captured the political left. This is due to a collection of brain studies that purport to show that people who identify as transgender have brain structures that are more similar to the sex with which they identify than to the actual sex. So it's the old, there's a male brain and a female brain, which is cobblers. Right, so widespread media coverage of these studies by, of course, the mainstream media lauds them as proof that transgender people are who they say they are. Progressive media outlets, though, have glommed. Is that an American word, glommed? What does that mean? Somebody tell me in the doobers. Glommed onto this narrative and published dozens of articles asserting that transgender people are born that way and that science proves trans people aren't making it up. Mainstream media like CNN, New York Times, Newsweek, Telegraph, and so on and so forth have also repeated this misinformation. I did a video, didn't I, about, what happens when it all goes wrong. Mainstream media gets captured first. To make matters worse, the brain sex conjecture is baked into clinical guidelines for medical transition and legislation for employment, healthcare and education. So this lie about the transgender brain is really, really dangerous. Surely a transgender brain would be your buttocks, wouldn't it? No. Right, the transgender brain sex argument is a load-bearing pillar supporting the belief that people are both transgender and should therefore medically transition as early as possible. Several female detransitioners who were medically transitioned as minors have even discussed how their doctors wrongly informed them that they possessed a male brain in a female body. This is pure pseudoscience. If it was 1972, Hammer Films would have made a horror story about it. It's just insane. One major player responsible for perpetuating this myth is Dr. Joshua Safer. Really? The irony. An endocrinologist and the executive director of the Mount Sinai Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery in New York City. Shouldn't that be the Mount Sinai Center for Quackery? Maybe. I could be wrong. Safer is a leading advocate of gender-affirming care and believes that gender identity is biologically determined. A review article he published on the topic relies heavily on brain studies and disorders of sexual development, which are often used to argue that sex binary should be represented as a spectrum. All the links are in this article, so you're going to need to do a little bit of digging, a little bit of reading, but it would be nice to have in your arsenal a really good answer to this ridiculous notion. A 2016 interview with WBUR gives insights into how the brain sex theory shifted Safer's perspective of the transgender experience from a mental health issue to a medical one. Up until a decade or so ago, the view among many providers was that this was probably a mental disorder, and the fear was that doing hormone therapy or doing surgery might be abetting a mental disorder, and the correct intervention would be to counsel people, Safer said. Right? But Safer research traces the increased evidence that gender identity is rooted in biology, which makes it so logical that an option for people in 2016 is to change their external appearance to meet that gender identity, he said. Imagine being a doctor and your entire, doctoring career was about treating people like they're Mr. Potato Head. I wonder if there's any money in it for him. Do you think? He's in America, he's a doctor. Any money in it? Why does it matter? Because Dr. Safer is currently the co-chair of World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH. bunch of quacks, and has been involved with, could be wrong, and has been involved with the organisation for many years, including serving as the first president of the US PATH, the United States affiliate of WPATH. Most importantly, he co-authored 2 sets of clinical guidelines for the medical care of transgender patients, the WPATH Standards of Care and the Endocrine Society Guidelines. These guidelines are considered the gold standard in gender medicine and are used by gender clinics worldwide. Don't forget, WPATH, that's the ones who think eunuchs are trans and you can give it to kids, right? Nutters, in my book. Only in my book, I could be wrong. Dr. Safer has testified in numerous legal cases relating to transgender rights, providing expert testimony on the purportedly scientific aspects of gender identity, particularly as it relates to brain sex. He appeared on a panel with comedian Jon Stewart last year and has discussed the concept of brain sex in various media outlets, including the New York Times and a PBS documentary. He's being lauded. He looks like a duck. Quack. I could be wrong. Quack. I could be wrong. It is therefore crucial that we be aware of this wherever it arises, the transgender brain sex argument, wherever. So the brain sex argument claims that transgender people have regions in the brain that structurally resembles that of the opposite sex. The assertion is based on a number of studies conducted in recent years on people who identify as transgender to gain insight into the potential biological basis of their condition. Some studies have even purported to show that the brain structure of transgender individuals more closely resembles the sex they identify as than their natal sex. Right? It's just bollocks. The brain sex argument is based on the idea that there are differences in brain structure and function between males and females that are influenced by hormones and genetic factors. Advocates of this argument argue that these differences can also be seen in the brains of transgender individuals and that these differences may contribute to the development of a gender identity. May constitute, right? They believe that a biological male who identifies as a woman has brain structures that more closely resemble that of typical females and vice versa. And then, gloriously, here's why it's wrong, okay? The majority of the studies on the transgender brain have a fatal flaw. They didn't account for or control for confounding variables like cross-sex hormone use, most importantly, sexual orientation. Gosh, it's almost like it's conversion therapy, isn't it? When a study doesn't control for confounding variables, it means that the researchers did not take into account other factors. So they decided what they wanted and then chased it. It's not science at all, right? Therefore, right, didn't take into account other factors that could have affected the results of the study, which makes it difficult or impossible to determine whether the relationship between the two variables being studied is truly causal or a byproduct of other unrelated factors. Cross-sex hormone use can have effects on the brain, including changes in brain structure and function. But more importantly, many trans-identified individuals are same-sex attracted. So the research on the transgender brain, claiming to find structural regions that resemble the opposite sex, are essentially rediscovering findings on the gay brain and reinterpreting the results to fit their preferred conclusion so they can practice their conversion therapy. She didn't say that last bit, I did. It's conversion therapy again. Homophobia at the heart of this every time. In the early 90s, neuroscientist and author Simon LeVay made the breakthrough discovery that the brains of homosexuals had structural differences that resembled that of straight members of the opposite sex. So it seems that while undertaking the hunt for the transgender brain, researchers have forgotten all about the discoveries made about the brains of same-sex attracted people. Oh my gosh! Trans rights activists and TQ plus nutters rewrite history, shocker. When researchers scan the brains of heterosexuals who identify as transgender, they also find they are typical for the natal sex. A UK-based student called Samuel explains. The homosexual subgroup show brains skewed along the male-female dimension. However, this is predominantly due to their co-occurring homosexuality. When they scan the brains of a heterosexual type, we find they're more typical of their natal sex. So it's bollocks. Why are gay people always at the end of this? Why do we always get hurt like women? You know? These men. Gender dysphoria, like other psychiatric conditions, may have some biological underpinnings. There are traits like neuroticism that can predispose people to psychiatric conditions, and research suggests that neuroticism has a strong biological basis, with both genetic and environmental factors contributing to its development. But gender activists are not concerned with gender dysphoria. Rather, they aim to establish a biological basis for being transgender that ceases to categorise it as a mental illness. Activists have pushed for a more inclusive definition of what it is to be transgender that seeks to reduce stigma and perceived barriers to medical transition services. I would say that what we've got here backing this is a bunch of men. with fetishes and paraphilias who want to push it so that they can practice those in public and with impunity? No. But then go and read it, right? It's useful to know this stuff, right? This is good stuff. Yeah, but there are transgender brains in there. No, there aren't, and here's why, right? And then you can just give them a summary and then send them to the article. Cracking stuff there, right? We like this very much, and thank you very much indeed. And I do recommend that you go and subscribe to Christina Buttons. So thank you, Christina. I've tagged you in. All right, thank you very much indeed for this article. I think it's really useful, particularly useful for my warrior teachers. So thank you very much indeed. All of you go and have a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.